Hi, everyone, and welcome to our August session of the User Group webinar series. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Al Morales. I am Business Consulting Manager here at Advisor Solutions, and what we are going to be discussing today are using the counts charts to show summary stats. As we're going through this webinar, if anybody has any questions at all, please feel free to raise your hand, send me a chat message, whatever you want to do, so that I can, stop what I'm discussing and address your questions, go into something I've discussed in more detail. It's not a problem at all for me. Just feel free to raise your hand or send me a chat. If I'm able to answer your question right away, I'll do so. Otherwise, I will be sure to get back to you as soon as possible. You can also contact us at support@advisorsolutions.com, and we can address your questions that way also. Moving forward, what is a counts chart? Counts chart shows the details of data in a table as a data grid. Gives you numeric summaries of your overall and selected data. Everyone here basically knows what the counts charts show, but I wanted to go into these counts charts a little bit more in detail because there's a lot of richness to the actual counts chart that many do not realize that they can utilize. What you're seeing at the moment is, just your basic counts chart. It's a count of records. It provides for you a total count, and that's what you see the arrow pointing at right now. That's the overall total count. It also provides to you the selected count, the unselected, and if you've excluded data, it will also show you the excluded. So what you're seeing right here is the counts chart where there is excluded data. However, there is also selected data and unselected data, which provides an overall, which sum up to the overall total count or the overall count of the number of records field within this data table that I'm working with at the moment. Every counts chart has a toolbar, and I'm going over just a basic overview as I get more in depth into what the counts chart can do for you, but I really wanted to just go over some basics about the counts chart. As is with any other chart in the Advisor software, every chart has a toolbar, and that includes the counts chart. When you open up that counts chart, you'll see the icons that appear. You've got the data configuration icon. You've got the property explorer icon. You've got summarize selected data only icon. You've got an edit the chart titles icon, which is this T. And you also have the View Chart Help icon. I have this Property Explorer in red here because this is what I want to go a little more in depth into today during our webinar. Now, when you click on the Property Explorer, what happens is the Property Explorer opens up. And over to the right, you'll see what it looks like when you click on that. And within there, there's a number of things that you can do. It shows you the name of the actual chart as Advisor is reading it. So this is actually the third counts chart within this project, and the chart data specification. So what you're seeing here is within the entity table, the number of records is the field that it is utilizing to come up with this counts chart. There's no grid specification right now. We'll cover that a little bit shortly. But you can either, from here, tell it to display the title or not to display the title. You can change the title of the actual chart itself. So over here where it says counts of records, if you wanted to change that, you can also do it also. You can also change the font that you want to see in the title. There are additional options. What we're looking at right now is the basic view, true or false. And I'll go into that a little more in the next few slides. Or do you only want to see selected counts? rather than seeing the selected, unselected, excluded, or total. You just want to see what you have selected. You can tell it to do so. So what I will want to touch on first is, as I explained previously, this is the basic view, which is true. It just shows you the selected, unselected, or excluded. And when it's true, this is what the counts chart is going to look like. However, if you make it false, it provides more statistical information about the data that you're looking at. So not only is it going to provide for you, and you'll notice it says false here, there's a drop-down where you can select true or false. And not only is it providing the selected, the unselected, the excluded, but it will provide to you the unique count, unique selected, the mode selected, the mean selected, standard deviation, and standard deviation selected. It'll also provide for you min, max, and sum information. So if this is information that is more meaningful for you when you're looking at your data and when you want to see a summary of what you have selected within a project or just what you have overall, just open up the Property Explorer and click on the drop-down and change it from true to false. Okay? Anybody have any questions so far? All right, I will move forward. Now, we've covered the basic view, true or false. Now, what if you only want to look at, selected, true or false? Right now, the basic view has selected only at false, and that's default. That's the default specification that it opens up at, and it looks just like your normal counts would. But if you make it true, let me go back, and I'll show this to you when we do our actual exercises where I show you within the software itself. What it'll do is it'll get rid of the total count, it'll get rid of the unselected and the excluded, and all it will show you is the selected count, which would be one row. Now, what if you wanted to summarize multiple variables? You essentially have you actually have three options. I've only included two on here, and when we go over the hands-on examples, I'll show you what I mean by a third. But I wanted to cover the two options that would mostly be used by most of our clients, or how I see most of them using them. When you open up the toolbar within the counts chart, you can select on the data specification icon and select each item that you want summarized within the data configuration icon. So right now, previously what we were counting were number of records. I'm going to go ahead and say, I want to now count ID numbers. How many ID numbers are in this table, in this gifts table. There's a field called 1, which would basically count the number of records. And there's a field called total commitment, which is a quantity field. But when you only select via the data configuration the fields that you want to count, all it's going to do is count the number of records for each of those fields. That's not going to be very insightful for anyone because you obviously know that you've got 256,510 records. You don't need to know that you have 256,510 ID numbers or 256,510 total commitment records. You may want to know how many unique ID numbers you have within this table. You may also want to know the sum of those records for each of those IDs. What I'm going to do is show you how we would go about providing that information using the counts chart. And as I was just describing, there's a negative with this. The overall summary stats count each record equally as individual records. That's not really what you want when you're counting multiple fields within a table. What we would do is use the grid specification to address this. And you notice we were looking at ID numbers, which would be the donors, 1, which would be the number of records within the table, and total commitment, which would be, in this case, a gift amount or a dollar amount within that record. So this is what it would look like if I were to do this. Now, we had the ID number field selected, but now I know that within that ID field, there are 6,824 IDs out of 256,000 records. There are 256,510 gifts out of those records, because each record counts as 1. And the total amount for those gifts add up to $713,992,979. How do we go about finding that? We use the grid specification to do this. So I open up the Property Explorer, and here you'll see the grid specification row. And earlier when I was going over these items here, this grid specification row was empty. And now it's not empty. What I did is I typed this information in here myself to tell it, I want you to display the data that I've selected in the following manner. So the layout labels, which are these, and statistics included in the counts chart can be customized. This is done through the grid specification property in the properties pane for the chart. And this is accessed via the Property Explorer button in the tool chart right here. Now, let me get into a little bit more detail. The grid specification property gives a definition of the chart layout. And here's the example. I've got 2 quotation marks here with nothing in between because I wanted to leave this area empty. And I put a space between there, and in quotes, I typed summary stats. And that's what's showing up in the header row. Then I type the word row in lowercase. What that's telling the grid specification is I want to go to the next row. And then what I'm going to do is give that row a field, or a field name. So I want it to say number of donors, which we're seeing here. And then I'm going to tell it what I want it to do over here under the summary stats. I want it to give me the unique selected number of rows or number of records that are within this table. So if there are 5 records in there, but only 2 of those records are unique, it's going to come back with the number 2. Then I'm going to type a space and type row again so that it knows now I'm moving on to the next row. I gave that row a label, number of gifts. And you'll notice that when I'm typing string characters, I always have it between quotation marks. That's very, very important for this to work. And then I'm typing number 2, and I'm going to tell it I want the sum of what I have selected. 2 sum selected. This is looking a little confusing at the moment, but I'll make it a lot more understandable as we move forward. Third, I'm typing row, and it takes me to another row, and I'm giving it a label, total commit dollars, and I'm asking it to 3, give me the sum of the selected. Now, how do I know to type 1, 2, or 3 when I do? Well, if you go to the chart data specification, remember I said it always starts with the table name and then the field name. So ID number is the first field name. 1 is the second field name. Total commitment is the third field name. So it's looking at it in that manner. So when I tell it I want the unique selected of 1, that would be this, the ID number for the number of donors. When I'm telling it that I want the sum selected of 2, that would be I want it to count all those records which are labeled as 1. And when I'm telling it that I want the sum selected of 3, this is the third field over here. These are interchangeable. I could have started with, the total commit over here at the top, and then I would have just told it, total commit here, and then 3 sum selected. I may or may not have confused you right now. Does anyone have any questions about this? I've got a question. What's your question? Okay, go ahead, Mark.
Can you change the format of the total commitment so that you're not showing decimal places?
All right, good question. The question was, can you change the format so that you're not looking at decimal places in the total commitments? Yes, that is possible. You want to look at how the field is actually, what field you're bringing in when you're using the grid specification. So if you don't want this to show decimal places right here, make sure that the field that you are summing on would be a field that does not include, right now I'm summing up a field that's currency, and that does include decimal places. I would create a new field that essentially gets rid of the decimal places. So I would create a new total commitments field and call it, say, or rename it, total commitment integer, and then just convert, the field that is a double into an integer, and then sum on that. Does that make sense, Mark? Any other questions? All right. So moving forward, I'm getting into a little more detail here on how it is that we came up with this right here. This is the actual grid spec that was typed on the previous page. Right here. And I've basically just broken it up. In this example, there are 4 rows, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And it includes a header row of 2 column labels, 1 and 2. And that would be these 2 quotation marks with nothing in between would be this first one. And then summary stats within quotation marks would be the second one. Then I'm going to type the space, and in lowercase I'm going to type row. And then I'm going to hit another space, and then in quotation marks I'm going to give the first row the name, and then the statistical variable that I wanted to use, or the value I wanted to use, or the specification I wanted to use. So I want the unique selected number of records within this table. So always remember the first one is a descriptive string, and it's followed by a statistical specification. The string word row should always be in lowercase, and it always identifies the beginning of a new row in the display chart. Anything after that is going to define the contents within the chart itself. This first row is always displayed as a heading, and items are separated by spaces, but to include spaces within a string field or in a label string, quote the string, for example, like you're seeing here, a name with spaces, or how you're seeing how I've typed them out here. Or if you don't want to use quotation marks, prefix each space with a tilde. And here's an example of how you would use a tilde to prefix each space. I find that using just, the quotation marks is the easiest. Now, statistics are specified like this. 1 through 9, and the statistic name. You can only do up to 9. You can only summarize up to 9 different variables or fields or counts, whatever it is that you want to look at. You can only do up to 9. Now, I do know this, that will be changing because I've spoken to our development staff, and they advised that they would be changing that so that it could include more. What I used on the previous pages are basically just unique selected and the sum selected, but you have a myriad of different options of what you can use for the chart data specification. You can count the number of rows. You can count selected, the unselected, the excluded, unique, the unique selected, the mode selected, the mean selected, standard deviation selected, the min selected, max selected, and sum and the sum selected. Within your fields, you can, if you basically have doubles or integer fields, there's so much that you can do using these statistic names within your chart data specification. Now, I basically told you that you have 2 options in using the count chart, but there's actually a third also. And I've been seeing some clients use this more recently. You can use the count chart to include text on a page. Everyone knows that you've got the navigation pane that pops out when you click on a tab, but you also may want to include just general text within a count chart so that it's there available at all times. And here's an example of how I would probably use a counts chart just to include some text. So within quotation marks, I've typed how to use counts to include text. Space, row, took me to the next row. The counts chart can also be used to include text for any myriad of reasons. Space, row. All that one must do is treat the grid spec as a single header column. Space, row, and so on. So if there's any instructions, directions, or reminders that you may want to include on any of the tabs within the advisor software, this is another good way that you can get information to your end users so that they see it at all times. Tips, advice, reminders, warnings. This may be one way that you can use it. Now, some basic general tips for the grid spec. Statistic names must be capitalized as shown in the grid on the previous slide. And let me take you back there to show you exactly what that is. You see where we've got, for example, here, mean selected. The M is in uppercase and the S is in uppercase with no space between. You need to type that out exactly as it is here. The S in sum and the S in selected is in uppercase. Make sure that it looks exactly in that manner. And to further show you, right here you'll see, I've got uppercase U, uppercase S, and unique selected with no space in between. Notice that the data can come from up to 9 fields in a single table, and it can be laid out in any way you wish. You don't need to put multiple statistics from the same field in a single row or column, and you don't need to lay out the table in the column per field layout that is used by the counts view by default. If there's no grid specification given, then each field is displayed in the column, and the stats displayed are governed by the basic view and the selected only property settings. That said, let's go over some examples on what we just covered within the actual software itself. So what I have here is project that has some charts and some counts in here. So right now we've got a project where all the data is selected. There's 93,743 records within this this small amount of data that I'm looking at. And let's say I'm going to go ahead and select females here. What does it do? It shows me the total count, which is 93,743, the selected. Over here there were 40,014 females. That's what we're seeing here, and they are selected. And there's 53,729 unselected, which would be the sum of the rest of this project. So this would have 53,531 and 198, totaling 53,729. Now, for example, if I wanted to grab these unknowns, which is 198, and exclude them, I'm sorry, let me grab the males and the females and exclude the unknowns. There's 198 unselected right now. We know they're unselected because the bar is gray. So now let me exclude those unknowns, and you see that the 198 now goes down to the excluded row. If I grab any one of these rows, for example, the males, or any of these bars, now we're seeing that 53,531 are selected, and the remaining 40,014 are unselected. Some items that I can use here, if I want to change the chart title, I can just say number of entities here. I can tell it, I'd rather it be, size 12 font, and it changes the size of the font. Another thing I can do here is I can tell it I don't want to display the title by deselecting the display title box, and it will get rid of the title, which will then allow me to, manipulate the charts and, make it more aesthetically pleasing if I didn't want that title to be there in the first place. But let me bring the title back so I can show you the other way that I might do the same things that I just did right now is I open up the toolbar, and again, remember the toolbar is at the bottom of each one of the charts, and I click on the Display Property Explorer, and right here where it says Display Title, I can just tell it to go to false, and it gets rid of the title. I can change the actual title itself. Let me bring the title back so you can see it change, and we'll call this count of entities. And when I click down here in this white area, the changes take effect. And what I want to do real quick is I'm going to get rid of these two bar charts here, and I am going to go from the basic view, because remember this is the basic view, and I am going to tell it to go false. I'm going to try that again in a second. Let me go back to true on the basic view. I apologize for that. But before I do that, let me go to selected only so that you can see what it does when I tell it to go from false to true on selected only. And there we go. Notice it got rid of all the other statistical specifications, and it's only showing me what I have selected. If I go back to false, it brings them back. Let me change this from basic view to false, and here it changed it to include all the other items that we discussed earlier. If I'm not happy with these, if I don't want these, change it back to true, and we're all set. I can close this, and move forward with my counts chart. Now the grid spec itself. Right here, I've got the same fields that we were looking at earlier. The ID number, 1, and the total commitment. I'm going to restore the excluded and select all to bring everything back. So we've got 256,510 records, of which all of them are selected. I'm going to open up my Property Explorer, and I'm going to expand it out a little bit so that I get more room, and I'm going to bring this over. So I'm going to recreate what we saw in the PowerPoint just a few moments ago. And just so that you see something a little different than what was in the PowerPoint, I will actually just go ahead and use different verbiage, if you will. Rather than just using the 2 quotation marks, this time I will say statistics, or I'll just say name for field. And I'll do a space, and then I will say summary stats, space, row, and then for the first one, or actually I want with the total commitment first. So I'm going to say 1, 2, 3, 3, sum selected, space, and then I'm going to type row for the next row, and I'm going to give that a name, and I will say number of donors. Number of donors, space, and this time, since this is the first one, I'll say 1, unique selected, space, row, and there was the other field. I want to know how many gifts there were, the 1 field. So I will say, and that was the second one, so I'll say 2, and I will just say sum selected. And I can either do sum selected, or I can just say selected. Tell me how many are selected. And it's not looking right. And why is it not looking right? Right here's my mistake. I didn't give this row a name. So let's call this one total commitment dollars. Space. Total commitment dollars, space, 3 sum selected, row, number of donors, unique selected, and over here I also needed to give it a label also. So we want number of gifts, space. And it's good that you're seeing me type that out and make those errors myself, because when I'm not paying attention, that's what's going to happen. And it just shows you how easy you can go through this and find where you need to make a correction if what you're seeing does not display what you want it to be. And that does happen at times. If I don't want to show the title, let me get rid of the title here. And I'm essentially done with this right now. I can close this out. And that's how I would use the grid specification to give me this type of count summarization within a project. There's one last way that I will show you that I might use the grid spec rather than putting the labels and the stats in this manner. I may decide I would rather have them look this way: number of donors with the number below it, number of gifts with the number below it, total commitment with the number below it. The way I would do that is, and I'm going to start from scratch on this one so you see me do it from the beginning. Click on the new counts, pull that up, and I am going to go to my gifts table, and I'll say I want the ID number, number 1, and let's find that total commitment field. We've seen this during this past half hour, but rather than this, I want it to look like this. So remember, in order to accomplish this right here, or this right here, you needed to basically provide the column names and then give it a new row with new row names and the statistical specification. What I'm going to do differently here is I'm going to give it the names first all the way across, and then I'm going to tell it I want a new row, and then I'm going to give it the statistical specifications. So let's do that. I open up my toolbar and then open up my Property Explorer. So this time what I want is number of donors, space, and in quotes, number of gifts, space, and in quotes, total commitment dollars, space, and then I'll tell it, now I want a new row, and for each one of these, I'll tell it what I want it to do. So for the number of donors, I want, and this is number 1 right here, unique, selected, space, number 2, which would be this one field right here, we will call it number of gifts. Oh no, we will basically tell it we just want the selected, space, and then for the third one, the total commitment, I want it to give me the sum selected. And then I click in this white area here, and here we go. So we've got 60,824 donors, which is what we have up here. We have 256,510 gifts, which is what we have up here. We have 713,992, or $713,992,979, which is what we have up here. And that's just another way that you can utilize the counts chart. If you don't want to, we normally put the counts chart, down in a corner or up on top, but maybe you might want to use the counts in a different manner, either above or below other charts within a page overall. That can be done also. Any questions? Let me pull this back up. All right, well, I'm sorry I'm a little bit over on this one. We can go on and on about this one, and we may have a follow-up to this user group webinar itself, because there's so much more within this this count chart itself. There's so much richness to it that, I mean, as you can see, we're at 12:45 right now, and we can go on and on about other items that we can use the counts chart for and how we might utilize it. But if you have any questions in the meantime, feel free to drop us a line at support@advisorsolutions.com. My name's Al Morales. I thank you all for coming, and I hope you all have a great day. Take care.